Hello, I'm Juliet Mann, and this is the Agenda podcast, CGTN Europe's one-stop shop for smart, in-depth discussion of the issues that really matter in the world today. Esports, short for electronic sports, is competitive video gaming. It's a lucrative industry worth $2.4 billion annually and is expected to grow 20% each year to be worth $10 billion by 2032. Big brand names driving the market include Twitch Interactive, Activision Blizzard, and the world's biggest gaming company, China's Tencent. Indeed, China has the world's largest esports market by revenue, plus a massive fan base, big investments, and a strong professional league. The Chinese market generated $445 million in 2022, 64.8% of the Asian esports market, and is expected to continue to grow to more than $600 million by 2028. In Asia, esports are already seen as sport, with little distinction made between a tennis star and an e-athlete. On a global scale, the sector's profile and recognition is increasing, with inclusion in international events like the Asian Games. And just before the Paris Games, it was confirmed that in 2025, esports will be the latest entrant to the Olympic stable. The first Olympic esports games will happen in Saudi Arabia next year. So just how big is the esports market and growth potential? And how is it shaping the future of live entertainment? Joining me now is Ralf Reichert, Chief Executive of the Esports World Cup Foundation. Thanks ever so much for coming on the agenda. Now, we've heard there some of the facts and figures of esports, but for the uninitiated, how would you describe it? What exactly is esports?
I think it's super simple. If you look at the history of humankind almost, right, playing is a core leisure activity. And playing with rules is called gaming. And structured games with leagues and tournaments are called sports. That is true for the physical world, and the same applies for the digital world, where video games are the equivalent to board games, and esports is equivalent to traditional sports.
How big is the market, and where in the world would you say is really flourishing?
So I think it depends on, if you look at esports, you need to look at the wider gaming market, right? Because that is really the base. And there's 3.4 billion gamers. There's $200 billion of revenue in 2026 in gaming overall. And then esports is a competitive subsect of that. There is approximately 700 million esports fans. And the industry does between $2 and $3 billion of revenue. So it's still small compared to the overall gaming industry, but it's a young sport and it's continuously and rapidly growing.
And in terms of where it's really flourishing, which regions would you highlight?
It's a good question. I mean, first and foremost, esports is a global phenomenon because video games are everywhere where people are playing video games, people are competing in esports. And that has been different in the past where actually, if you look at it, consoles and PCs were part of the richer regions in the world. Mobile phones and mobile games have completely changed that. So if you would have asked me 10 years ago, it would be the US, Korea, Europe would be the leading markets. Nowadays, it's probably more China, Indonesia, Malaysia, and a lot of the southeastern markets, and even the African markets are catching up. So it really depends on how you look at it. I think, again, to summarize it, it's really a global phenomenon. And it depends a little bit on the platform and the games that are played differently all across the world.
We've got the world's first World Cup for esports games going on in Riyadh. What kind of audience are you attracting? What can we expect?
Sure, and I mean, if we connect it to what we spoke earlier about, right? So if we talk about people visiting the Esports World Cup, it's the largest esports event of that kind in the history of what happened. It has 21 different games. Most esports tournaments are just single game tournaments. This brings in all the best games from the world. So it really speaks to an audience of the 3.4 billion gamers across the world. We've had in our first 4 weeks, 1 million people visiting the venue where the Esports World Cup is happening. So it's huge in terms of general interest. And we had hundreds of millions of people watching.
Really recently, esports has been welcomed into the Olympic family. They're going to have the first Esports Olympics taking place in Saudi Arabia in 2025. What impact do you think that's going to have?
I mean, if you look at the kingdom, right, it's investing heavily in future industry, and video games and esports are one of them. The impact of esports becoming Olympics obviously big because for two reasons. I mean, number one, it's almost the ultimate recognition of it being one of the leading sports in the world. It gives aspiration to players. And number two, esports is very club-driven, it's very team-driven, which is great, right? Because borders don't play as much as a role as in traditional sports, where you physically need to meet. Esports and video games, you can play across borders as a starting point. So the Olympics bringing that nation interest, that national heroes into the esport will be an interesting example and will hopefully continue to help the industry accelerate to grow.
You mentioned all those millions that Saudi Arabia is pouring into esports. That hasn't come without controversy. What's your take on that?
Well, I think, Saudi Arabia has been investing a lot in different sports and entertainment industries. There's certainly, a view which people were skeptical about. Can the country be open to any visitor? Can it host such massive tournaments? And so we've taken the step to invite people, invite players, invite fans, everyone to come here to feel it firsthand, to experience it firsthand, and making sure everyone is welcome. And I think the country has done an incredible job in hosting people from all across the world. We've had zero problems with players and fans. And we expect and hope that this continues, and the country, which is in progress and is in change, can continue to be a great host for the sport, be it esports or traditional sport.
I wonder, though, how much business sense it really makes. I mean, does esports really generate money? I mean, the games are lucrative, but they're often treated as a marketing expense, not as a standalone business. So is the esports business model really working?
So I think there's two things to consider. I mean, number one, every sport has a social component, right? It's about people participating, competing, and people watching and being entertained. That's reason number one why the kingdom's investing into esports, and I think that's true for any traditional sports. From a pure business perspective, right, so the kingdom has a gaming and esports national strategy. So it's continuously investing throughout the last years and the future in both industry to grow them. They are both some of the largest entertainment industries in the world. And specifically in esports, what you're addressing, right, the business model has been very sponsorship driven, and there has been a lack of government funding. If you look at traditional sports, including the Olympic, all of those sports are heavily subsidized by governments, being it the top tournaments in the world, which are again supported by governments, or being it grassroots tournaments and leagues where, most of the football fields or American football fields or basketball pitches in the world are actually subsidized by communes, by colleges, by countries. So I think what Saudi is doing here, very forward-looking, is actually investing into that sport because it's going to drive the games industry. It's entertainment for both the local population as well as a global audience.
What would you say that the main challenges are, though, that the industry faces? I mean, is it the fast pace of changing technology? Is it about trying to scale up? Talk us through it.
Good question. I mean, I think it's a broad set of things, right? I mean, it's still new, right? Even though, it's now, we're having a World Cup and the Olympics are coming, it's still a much younger industry than traditional sports industry. I think topic number two, as you said, technology is changing basically everywhere. Where you play, how you watch, how you even attend these things. It's a constant involvement and changing industry. I think topic number three, which I said, which is big, is that it's actually very club-driven. The teams have a super important factor because they don't have this traditional regional origin and these hundreds of years of history and storytelling.
China was one of the first countries to recognise esports as a sport back in the early 2000s. how hard is it? And have you found it to be to convince governments and the public, as well as regulators, that esports is a genuine sport?
Look, it depends on, at what time you would ask me that question. I mean, first and foremost, every new medium in the history of humankind has been seen by skepticism by the parent generation, so to speak. So 25 years ago, when I was competing, it was super hard to convince anyone that this is actually a good thing and not something negative, not something to be stigmatized. That is today much, much easier. But as we're speaking, right, and even the public discussion, it's people still asking why is Saudi investing so much in it? And exactly, basically gave your answer yourself. It is a very young leader. It's a very forward-thinking industrial investment. So even nowadays, a lot of governments are run by people who don't play video games, who haven't grown up with this. And looking forward, this will automatically change because there is no person below 30 at this point in time who hasn't played video games, who hasn't experienced this firsthand. And that makes all the difference, like it has done with music, like it has done with TV, like it has done with cinema, like with any other medium in the past. China was incredibly forward-looking, and it is the largest games market in the world. And one of the reasons why it is that it recognized it as a sport and as a social activity very early, much earlier than most other governments.
Ralf Reichert, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
In July, NIP Group became the first Chinese esports company to float and list on the NASDAQ stock exchange. It says it plans to lead the future of digital entertainment. The company's chairman and co-CEO, Mario Ho, joins me now. Thanks ever so much for coming on the agenda. Now, NIP Group is the first listed Chinese company in the esports industry. What message are you sending to investors and to your peers?
Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here. But I think the message that we're sending is quite a few, actually. There are quite a few messages. The first one is the fact that China, with the vast amount of esport lovers, over 400 million people being esport lovers, it is the biggest esports market in the world, and it continues to grow. And any company that is able to successfully build a business in esports in China will do well on a world scale, especially in the capital markets. I guess that's one. Secondly, by listing on the NASDAQ exchange, being on the biggest capital market platform in the world, it shows that esports is still very much investable, it is very much desirable, and that lots of investors everywhere in the world are excited and are constantly looking at how the esport industry develops.
It's investable then, it's desirable. How would you say that esports is changing the world of entertainment?
I think esport has climbed the ranks of entertainment very, very quickly. If you look at the viewership numbers, it's already exceeded what you would expect from certain blockbuster movies, from TV shows, especially from a lot of traditional sporting events as well. I think aside from the Olympics and the Soccer World Cup or Football World Cup, esport events have already overtaken most of the other sporting events as well. So I think from that point of view, esport has become a mixture of entertainment and sports. From an entertainment perspective, the experience, both online and offline esport events, have been amazing. The sort of crowd that it generates, the sort of production quality that goes into esport events nowadays is completely comparable to what you would expect when you watch ESPN.
Now, you've already mentioned how important esports in China is to the rest of the world and how that market's growing. But let's talk about you as a company. What sets you apart from some of the other esports companies who have, let's face it, faltered as public companies?
So I think a few differences between what NIP Group does and our peers. The first one is how globalized we truly are. So of course, as a Chinese national, I'm very proud whenever I read headlines about us being the first Chinese listed esports company. But truthfully, we are a very, very globalized platform. We're operational in 3 different continents. We're expanding our businesses to Abu Dhabi, in the UAE. So in terms of the ability to actually discover esport opportunities and to create synergies across different regions, we're the first one and the most capable in terms of that. And the second thing is, we are not just an esports team. Now, of course, the esport teams that we own and operate are our crown jewels. It's what people have known us for many, many years. However, we're now a group. We're an esports group, meaning we have multiple different business ventures. We have different business lines. We have different revenue streams. We don't just do teams anymore. We're able to monetize on so many more things. We're now in the events production business. We have our own Esports Live Nation comparison. We are one of the largest esports talent management groups in the world. In that case, it's almost like an esports IMG. Now we're venturing off into esports education, esports hotels. We're also going to go big into game publishing as well, moving upstream into the game publishing world. So essentially what makes us different from all of our peers is our ability to discover and operate on so many different revenue streams so quickly over the last few years and so well.
Look, you've talked about monetizing the game, the industry. There's a lot of money, as you mentioned, invested in esports, but when are you going to start making money?
So in terms of making money, I think back in 2022 already, we were able to cross the break-even point and was non-GAAP profitable. And in 2024, we're looking to reach that mark again. But I think starting 2025, that's going to be a very, very big year for us. We're going big into the game publishing world. So with those revenue streams coming in, I think 2025 will be a very, very positive year in terms of making money for us.
And where do you see the growth in the industry coming from? I don't just mean in terms of the different segments of the industry, but in terms of the regions where you're getting excited.
Well, I think China will continue to be the #1 market, and it will become more and more developed in terms of commercialization. What we have begun to see is that a lot of Chinese publishers, like Tencent, like NetEase, and ByteDance, are beginning to actually share revenue, in-game revenue, with the esports companies and the esports teams. So you'll start to see a lot more esport team branded stickers, characters, skins, that appear in-game, and when customers and players actually purchase those, a part of that revenue will start to split back to the teams. Now, the West has traditionally done that very, very well. Every single year, whenever there is a big CS major, the CS teams, especially those who own permanent franchise slots like we do, actually make a very decent profit in terms of collaborating with game publishers and selling those skins. But in China, that's starting to pick up. And with the vast amount of money that is in-game, in terms of transactions, I think the esports teams will bode well there. But in terms of region, what excites me most is going to be the Middle East. Now, we can see that a lot of money is being invested into the region by the local governments, promoting esports through the Saudi World Cup. And of course, next year, massive news for us to have the actual Olympics of esports to be held there. But what you'll see aside from Saudi Arabia is countries like the UAE, regions and cities like Abu Dhabi, that they're actually looking to build an overall gaming ecosystem. Now, with that, you'll see more developers actually base themselves there. They'll be producing better games, and esport titles will look to expand their regions to actually set up leagues and franchises. Well, of course, there will be teams like us coming from abroad joining those leagues there, but it's also exciting to see a lot of local teams will pick up pace through joining the local leagues there. So I think the Middle East is going to be a very fast-growing region. The sort of demographic of gamers there is very, very fantastic. Lots of gamers, lots of esport lovers and viewers, and I think it will be very, very quick for esports to become one of the most loved national sports in that region.
It's so interesting, though, you talk about this ecosystem in terms of the way the industry operates. I mean, NIP Group is now an amalgamation of different entities. Is that how you see the industry developing in the future?
I think we've done very well in terms of consolidation. Now, that's allowed us to grow very, very quickly and spanning across different regions. I don't know if that's going to be the right model for our peers, but I definitely believe that it is a successful one for those that are able to take on this as efficiently as we do. Building the ecosystem is going to be a very, very key phase for the esport market going forward. I think in the past, what you've seen is a lot of esport companies focusing on their own segments of business. Event production companies are focused on just building events. Esport teams are just focused on the prize money and maybe scoring a few additional sponsors every single year out. But for what we do, we see the whole ecosystem in the whole cycle working as the most important thing. So what we're going to do, we're going to publish esport titles our offline events production company will produce the events and physically create the league. Our teams will join the league, as well as invite other peers of teams to join the league. We will be making money via publishing the game, but also by creating a long-lasting esport ecosystem that allows all segments of our business to gain from that. But more importantly, it is a proven model. In order to lengthen the longevity, the lifespan of an esport title, you need to have a good esport ecosystem. You need to have a functional league, one that is promoted online by live streamers, has a lot of fandom from the teams that operate both online and offline, and ultimately the esport title is able to live longer and grow larger, and in that sense, everybody gains in the game.
Mario Ho, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
We've talked about how some companies are already profiting from the growth in esports, but there's also big money to be made for the athletes. The top earning esports player as of this year is Johan Sundstein, popularly known as No Tail. To date, he's won more than $7 million in prize money alone. So what does it take to be an esports superstar? With me now is competitive gamer Jake Trotman, who's also Associate Lecturer at the University of Salford on the Esports Business Management course. Great to see you. Thanks for coming on the agenda. I want to know, how did you get involved in the world of esports?
Yeah, it's a very kind of long story that begins in my childhood, really. I've been playing video games since I was 3 years old. My sister and my dad were both very, very big into video games, and that kind of trickled down to me. Kind of got the competitive aspect because my sister, despite being a lot older than me, would never let me win as a child. So I was kind of forced to kind of adapt to her level very quickly. And then, you know, that kind of competitive spirit was kind of baked into me. As a teenager, I got very heavily into games like Team Fortress and became a very high-ranked player in the European circuit for that game.
So is that the particular game that got you hooked? Because not all games are part of, you know, global competitions, are they?
No, absolutely not. I mean, you know, still the main general kind of gaming market is very targeted to kind of solo and casual play, but then certain esports kind of with the backer of their publishers, their developers, kind of make it into this kind of very kind of competitive environment. And so I put literally hundreds of hours into this game as a teenager, probably to the detriment of my studies for a little while. But I would play with people all over the world, very high level. The game kind of got abandoned by its publisher, so I kind of transitioned into different games. I played a lot of Super Smash Brothers, which is very popular amongst kind of casual gamers, but then has this very kind of competitive element kind of lying underneath the iceberg. Became top 8 player in the UK university scene for that game. Yeah. And then I kind of transitioned out of playing. I found that in a sense that it kind of damaged my enjoyment of games as a medium to kind of have it as what was effectively my job. So I kind of went into player management, managed Salford Esports Society, which is the University's of Salford's esports division.
So Jake, so when did you realise that it wasn't just casual play, it wasn't just recreational? When did you realise that, you know what, I can make a career out of this?
I think I kind of noticed that, you know, I was putting a lot of time into the game. I was very, very good. I would go into kind of like a casual game and just kind of wipe the floor with everyone else. I remember, you know, one particular match when I was about 14, I got about 50 kills in one round, which was about 10 minutes. And I realized that I had kind of gone beyond the scope of just being able to play with my friends. I was ready to kind of take this into kind of professional level. And I kind of got scouted within a game. Someone messaged me and was like, I'd really love for you to play on my team with me. And then, yeah, it kind of all spiraled from there. I would kind of make it very regimented. I would treat it as if it was like a part-time job that a lot of kind of students have. I would designate certain hours to it. I would make sure that I was kind of in mental and physical condition to play.
Let's talk about that. Jake, let's talk about that mental and physical condition. Because I wonder how you compare esports to traditional sports, because it's a different kind of fitness.
It kind of is, it kind of isn't really. A lot of professional esports athletes will have the same kind of nutritionists, sports psychologists that are kind of like a Premier League footballer would, for example. But obviously, physical fitness is less dependent in an esports environment. I have arthritis. I've had arthritis since I was 8. That kind of blocks me from playing something like football, like rugby. It doesn't inhibit my ability to kind of get behind a keyboard and mouse and play a game at the highest possible level. So I think it is the more mental aspect, things like reaction timing, making sure that you're in the right headspace to play is very, very important, more so maybe than it is for traditional sports.
It sounds like you're saying it's more inclusive, perhaps, than some traditional sports, certainly at the elite level.
I would absolutely say so. I think esports is a very inclusive environment. You have kind of like mixed gender competition, mixed ability, etc. There's no Paralympics for esports, right? I think that, not to the detriment of traditional sports, you have to do things in a certain way. But I remember a few years ago, one of the best League of Legends players in the world was a paraplegic. He didn't have use of his arms, so he would play that game with accessible equipment using his feet and was still one of the best players in the world. That's not something you could do for a traditional sport. I think that it kind of allows you to find a way around it to still, despite maybe being a little bit different to your competitors, still play on their kind of level.
What's it like, Jake, at these tournaments? What's the crowd like, the atmosphere, the vibe?
I think that, people kind of get a very traditional image of gamers in their head, and they're not particularly wrong at some points, but esports competitions, kind of cultivate a very diverse crowd. The atmosphere is just like it is for a traditional sports event. I mean, I've been to plenty of esports competitions as a player and then as kind of a spectator, and you have people cheering for these teams much like they would their football club. The enthusiasm and the kind of loudness that these events get to is kind of unparalleled the way it would be 10 years ago when it was a much more niche audience. It's kind of really breaking into the mainstream, and you're seeing kind of the same reaction as you would to something like a football match.
You're now an associate lecturer at the University of Salford on their HND Esports Business Management course.
I am.
How do you see the business then of esports developing?
I think that I come from a business background. My university degree was in digital business, so it's something that the crossover is definitely there. But esports as a business is becoming massive. The level of sponsorship, the level of kind of investment, especially from certain countries who are investing heavily into esports, is kind of very similar to how it was for traditional sports 20 years ago. If you look at some of the top teams in the esports industry, their jerseys are plastered completely in logos. There's barely any blank space. And that's kind of trickling down to kind of more grassroots organizations, the same way that nowadays in football, even a Division 2 team has plenty of sponsors. That's becoming true for grassroots esports. Companies really want to be involved in esports. It's definitely a growing industry.
Jake Trotman, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Remember, you can subscribe to this podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also find more agenda content on CGTN Europe's Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, and YouTube channels. Until next time, goodbye.
The most interesting questions.
Are there other living beings beyond Earth?
Will man or machine be in charge?
Great question.
Always have more than one answer.
Well, hold on, let me just draw up a list.
And always come from more than one person.
That's where the credibility lies.
The concept of having a machinery which is alive and evolving didn't wait for us.
The end of inequality of incomes and wealth around the world, can you imagine how difficult that is at the moment to achieve?
Every episode, Stephen Cole, Murray Beveridge, and some of the brightest minds out there shed light on the answers to some of the most intriguing questions.
There are two ways of looking at this.
Machines can't really discriminate between civilian and military targets.
The Answers Project,
Maybe we need to just look at this in a bit more detail.
Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence.
The Answers Project, a new podcast from CGTN Europe.